Kirito. メール
Not if I can help it.
Sword Art Online falls apart almost immediately because the original Kirito drains every bit of excitement out of the story. He is the most boring form of an overpowered protagonist, a blank slate who never struggles, never grows, and never earns the praise the show keeps throwing at him. The entire series bends over backwards to pretend he is impressive, even though he brings nothing to the table except plot armor and convenience. The show keeps insisting that he is special, but it never gives the audience a real reason to believe it. This emptiness is one of the biggest reasons the story feels shallow and lifeless. A female Kirito would instantly fix this by breaking the tired mold the original relies on. She would give the world actual spark, actual tension, and actual personality. Instead of dragging the show down, she would finally give it something worth caring about. And I do not mean that Kirito simply looks like a girl, like what happened in the Phantom Bullet arc. I mean that Kirito is actually a real girl with a female appearance, body, voice, and presence. Not a disguise or a misunderstanding. Female Kirito would fix one of the biggest issues in Sword Art Online, which is the complete lack of real character growth. The original Kirito glides through the world as if the game is on easy mode. There is no real struggle, no emotional weight, and no true sense of danger in the story. Everything feels easy, and that removes any reason to care about what happens next. If the main character were a girl in the same situation, the story would naturally have more tension and pressure. She would face fear, doubt, and real limits, which would make every challenge feel heavier and more meaningful. Her wins would feel earned because she would have to fight for them, and her fear would feel real instead of empty. Instead of a flat and lifeless character, her presence would bring real emotion and strength to the story. Girls are often looked down upon in video games, so they have to work harder to prove their skill and value. And that struggle would have added depth, drama, and purpose that the show clearly needed. If Kirito was a girl, it would also remove the awkward harem nonsense that weighs the show down. In the original, every girl falls in love with him for no reason, turning serious moments into cringe. A female Kirito would put an end to all of that. Characters would form real relationships with her instead of collapsing into cliches. The story would feel more mature instead of embarrassing. The biggest improvement is simple. A female Kirito would force Sword Art Online to actually work for its emotional moments. The original show relies on shortcuts, wish fulfillment, and cheap drama. This version would give the world weight, danger, and tension. It would finally feel like the deadly game it claims to be, instead of a playground for an overpowered self-insert. The original Sword Art Online wasted its own potential. A version with a female Kirito would fix nearly every weak point the story suffers from. It would be fresher, more emotional, more intense, and far more memorable. This rewrite is not just better. It is the version the original should have been from the start. We have also seen the overpowered male protagonist done many times before, to the point where it has become one of the most predictable tropes in the genre. The quiet, cool, unbeatable guy has been copied so often that it no longer feels interesting. Sword Art Online leans completely on this tired idea, and it makes the story feel stale from the very beginning. A female protagonist in that same role would immediately stand out, simply because it is far less common. When a girl takes the lead as the strongest character in the world, it grabs attention in a way the usual male power fantasy cannot. There is an instant spark of originality because the audience is not already familiar with 100 versions of the same character. A female Kirito would take all of the strengths of the concept, while avoiding the boredom that comes from repeating the same formula again and again. It also opens the door for a more dynamic story. When a female lead becomes the strongest warrior in a dangerous world, it feels bold and surprising rather than routine. Her power would carry more weight because it goes against the expectations set by the genre. Viewers would naturally want to see how she fights, how she leads, and how she handles the pressure, because it is not something the genre gives us very often. This simple change would push Sword Art Online into far more exciting territory. Instead of blending in with countless other series, it would create a main character who feels fresh, memorable, and worth following. A female Kirito would take a trope that has become dull and turn it into something that actually grabs the audience and makes the story feel alive again. The story would also make a lot more sense. In the original version, the other players hate Kirito for no clear reason, and the show never explains it in a way that feels believable. It feels forced, and it makes their reactions look shallow and random. A female Kirito would fix this problem immediately. Her skill and strength would naturally surprise the other players, and their frustration would actually feel grounded in the world of the story. Instead of pointless hostility, their reactions would now come from genuine jealousy. They would see someone they underestimated rising above them, mastering the game, and becoming stronger than any of them expected. That kind of tension would make far more narrative sense than the original attempt at drama. It would give the conflict real emotion and real motivation instead of leaving the audience confused. This change would make every interaction sharper and more believable. The players would not react out of nowhere. They would react because they cannot stand that someone they overlooked is outperforming them in every way. A female Kirito would turn a clumsy plot point into a powerful source of character conflict, and the story would finally feel like it has logical, meaningful tension instead of random hostility thrown in for drama. It would also make sense why Kirito prefers to play solo and stay away from everyone else. In the original version, his decision to separate himself from the other players feels random, and the show never gives a strong reason for it. A female Kirito would change this in a way that actually fits the world and the characters around her. Other players in Sword Art Online spend a lot of time acting awkward, clingy, and desperate for attention, and it is easy to imagine them crowding around a skilled female player for all the wrong reasons. They would focus more on trying to impress her than on actually surviving the game. Instead of offering real teamwork, they would become a distraction, slowing her down and wasting her time. A female Kirito would see right through that behavior, and she would have no patience for it. Her choice to play solo would feel practical and smart. She would want to avoid groups that only create drama, tension, and emotional noise. She would choose to focus on clearing the game, getting stronger, and staying alive, rather than dealing with players who are more interested in attention than teamwork. With this change, her independence would feel earned, logical, and completely justified. This simple shift would fix one of the most confusing parts of the original story. A female Kirito playing solo would not feel like a forced character trait. It would feel like a survival strategy, and it would make her strength and determination stand out even more. The original Kirito rarely shows fear or pressure, and this hurts the entire tone of the story. When the main character treats a life-or-death world like a casual video game, the audience stops feeling any sense of danger. Boss fights lose their tension, powerful enemies feel like background decoration, and the stakes never rise above a mild inconvenience. The show keeps insisting the world is deadly, but the calm, emotionless attitude of Kirito sends the opposite message. A female Kirito would immediately change that dynamic. Seeing a girl step into massive boss arenas, dodge attacks that could kill her instantly, and fight while surrounded by players who doubt her would raise the emotional intensity of every scene. Her struggle would feel real and human. Even if she is strong, the audience would sense the pressure she is under. Every close call, every risky decision, and every moment of hesitation would pull viewers deeper into the world. Leading raids would also feel more powerful. A female Kirito standing at the front of a raid team, shouting commands, guiding inexperienced players, and charging into danger would give those scenes a level of gravity the original never achieved. It would show her courage instead of assuming it. It would show her growth instead of skipping over it. She would earn the respect of the players around her instead of having it handed to her simply because the story says she deserves it. Surviving alone would also take on a new meaning. It would highlight her independence, her focus, and her determination to overcome a world that constantly underestimates her. Every victory would feel earned because it would be a battle against both the game itself and the assumptions of the players around her. Her triumphs would mean something. Instead of feeling automatic, her victories would feel like real accomplishments. Instead of the world bending to make her look cool, it would challenge her at every step. This shift would transform Sword Art Online from a flat, predictable story into one filled with tension, emotion, and genuine excitement. The original Sword Art Online constantly treats Kirito as if he is destined to win. From the moment he appears, the story bends the entire world around him. Enemies fall too easily, other players step aside for him, and every important moment seems designed to make him look unstoppable. This removes any sense of challenge or unpredictability. When the show treats the main character like a chosen hero who cannot lose, the world stops feeling alive and the stakes collapse. A female lead would break that pattern immediately. She would not fit the mold that the players in the virtual world expect. In those early episodes, the other players would not automatically assume that she is the strongest, the smartest, or the most skilled. They would underestimate her, doubt her decisions, and question her authority. This kind of resistance would force the story to explore how the society in the game actually works instead of skipping over it for the sake of convenience. Suddenly, player dynamics would matter. Groups would form opinions about her. Guilds would whisper rumors and try to judge whether she is worth following. Small disagreements would turn into political tension because her presence challenges the unfair system that normally places male players in positions of leadership. These reactions would not feel forced. They would grow naturally from the assumptions the players carry into the game world. Guild politics would instantly become richer. Every guild would have a reason to watch her closely. Some would want her skills, some would want her leadership, and others would feel threatened by her popularity. Her presence would cause real shifts in power, and the story would finally have the depth that the original desperately lacked. Jealousy would also become a believable driving force instead of the awkward, unclear hostility seen in the original. When a female Kirito rises to the top despite being underestimated, it becomes obvious why other players react with frustration. They would see someone they misjudge surpassing them, and that would create genuine conflict. The tension would grow from character emotion rather than writer convenience. With a female lead, Sword Art Online would no longer feel like a world built to glorify one character. It would feel like a real, competitive environment filled with people who have ambitions, insecurities, and pride. Every female character who meets Kirito immediately turns into a love interest, and it becomes one of the most distracting flaws in the entire series. Instead of letting these characters develop their own goals, personalities, and arcs, the story pushes them into the same shallow pattern. They admire Kirito, they blush around him, and they fall for him almost instantly. These interactions feel forced, unnatural, and repetitive. The result is a weak harem structure that drains the emotional strength out of the cast. If Kirito were a girl, all of that would change for the better. These characters would finally be free to form real connections with the protagonist instead of being written as potential romantic options. The female cast would not be competing for the love and affection of Kirito. They would be building relationships that have actual purpose, emotion, and depth. A female Kirito would open the door for meaningful friendships built on trust, respect, and shared struggle. Rivalries would become more interesting as well. When a female lead rises through the ranks, other players would challenge her, push her, and clash with her in ways that feel grounded. The tension would come from conflicting goals and personalities, not random romantic jealousy. These rivalries would enrich the story instead of dragging it into predictable territory. Alliances would also feel more authentic. Characters would join her not because they are attracted to her, but because they believe in her strength, her leadership, and her determination to survive. The story would finally show how bonds in a life-or-death world form through loyalty and shared experience rather than cheap romantic shortcuts. Without the forced harem, the entire cast would feel more balanced and human. Every character would have the space to grow as an individual. Their relationships with a female Kirito would highlight their personalities instead of flattening them into stereotypes. The story would gain emotional variety, stronger character development, and a cast that feels alive instead of one-dimensional. In the end, shifting Kirito to a girl would fix one of the largest structural problems in Sword Art Online. It would transform shallow romantic tension into real human connection, and the story would finally feel like it has a living, breathing ensemble rather than a collection of forced crushes orbiting a single protagonist. In the original story, Asuna slowly loses her momentum and gets overshadowed, and it is one of the most disappointing choices the series makes. She begins as a powerful, confident fighter who stands on the same level as Kirito. But the moment the story decides Kirito must be the center of everything, her development is pushed aside. She stops being an equal partner and becomes more of a background character whose purpose is to support the protagonist. This shift damages her character and weakens the emotional core of the story. With a female Kirito, the dynamic would automatically become stronger. The relationship between the two would not rely on one character being elevated while the other is sidelined. Instead, it could be built on teamwork, respect, and genuine mutual strength. The two would inspire each other, challenge each other, and constantly push each other to evolve. Their partnership would feel like a real bond between equals, not a relationship where one hero takes over the spotlight. A female Kirito would allow Asuna to keep her identity as a leader and a top-tier fighter. Instead of the story turning her into a secondary character, it would highlight her skills even more. She would not be competing with Kirito for relevance, because the narrative would not be forcing the male lead trope. Their shared power would create a more engaging dynamic, where both characters rise together rather than one being forced downward for the sake of the plot. The emotional weight of the story would also increase. When both characters stand on equal footing, every decision, sacrifice, and victory becomes richer. Their teamwork in battle would feel precise and thrilling. Their moments of weakness would feel more honest, because each could support the other. Their trust would come from experience and shared struggle, not from rushed writing or forced romance. Most importantly, the story would not need to erase the strength of Asuna to highlight Kirito. A female Kirito ensures that the writers cannot rely on the tired pattern of the male protagonist overshadowing every other character. The arc of Asuna would remain intact. Her growth would continue. She would retain her power, her confidence, and her relevance through every major moment. By keeping both characters strong, the story would finally deliver on the potential the original ignored. Together, a female Kirito and Asuna would create a partnership that feels balanced, emotional and unforgettable instead of one that slowly falls apart as the original series progresses. And seeing a love story between two girls would actually be interesting and fresh. That kind of story almost never happens in this genre, which keeps doing the same safe pairings over and over. It would add something new, give the characters more depth, and make the world feel less stale instead of repeating the same tired ideas. If Kirito were a girl and fell in love with Asuna, it would change the story in a huge way, especially when you look at the infamous chapter 16.5. That part of the story is already awkward and badly handled, and a different lead would force it to be written with more care or not exist at all. It would push the series away from cheap shock value and make the relationship feel more meaningful instead of uncomfortable. It would also make the subtitle of Sword Art Online progressive actually make sense and even give it a double meaning. Not only would it refer to the story moving forward through the floors, but it could also hint at the series actually trying something new and modern with its characters. That kind of clever twist would give the show some depth it completely lacks right now. But of course, the author is not very clever and never thought of this. Instead, what we got is a boring dumpster fire that is not progressive at all, in either sense of the word. The story drags along with lazy writing and pointless twists, completely missing any chance to be clever or meaningful. It is the exact opposite of what progressive should mean. Sword Art Online follows almost every overpowered male protagonist cliché in the book. It feels like the writers checked a list of familiar traits and handed all of them to Kirito without thinking about how repetitive the result would be. He is quiet, he is mysterious, he is unbeatable, and the world constantly bends to prove how special he is. This formula has been used so many times that it no longer surprises anyone. It creates a predictable story with a main character who blends in with dozens of similar leads from other action shows or movies. Changing Kirito to a girl breaks that pattern instantly. It removes the expectation that the strongest and most important character must always be a young male hero. A female Kirito would feel fresh right away, because the audience is not used to seeing a girl step into the exact same power role with the same level of dominance. Her presence would challenge the structure of the story and force it to be more creative, instead of relying on the same tired shortcuts. Suddenly, the show would have a hook, something that makes people stop and pay attention. A girl who solos bosses, leads raids, and becomes the top threat to the enemies of the game is far more intriguing than yet another unstoppable male swordsman. It would not feel like a recycled idea. It would feel like the series has something new to say. A female lead would also make the story stand out in the broader world of movies and television. When there are so many series featuring nearly identical male protagonists, a girl in the same role would cut through the noise. She would draw curiosity, discussion, and excitement. People would compare her to other female action leads, not to the sea of similar male ones, which instantly gives Sword Art Online a unique identity. Most importantly, she would force the writers to rethink the journey of the characters. They could no longer rely on lazy cliches because the audience has different expectations for a female lead. The story would need to show her strength through real challenges, real growth, and real emotional beats. This change would give Sword Art Online a sense of originality and creativity that the original version loses by clinging to the most predictable tropes available. By making Kirito a girl, Sword Art Online would break free from the endless parade of interchangeable male power fantasies and finally gain a protagonist who feels memorable, distinct, and worth following. Overall, the show would simply have more personality. Right now, Sword Art Online feels like it is trying to rely on spectacle to cover up shallow writing. But a female Kirito would force the story to develop actual depth. It would inject energy into scenes that currently feel flat, because the lead character would finally stand out instead of fading into the long line of identical overpowered heroes. Female Kirito turns Sword Art Online from a generic power fantasy into a bold, memorable adventure with a lead who actually brings something new to the table. Instead of repeating the same tired formula, The show would gain a protagonist whose presence demands better storytelling. Her journey would invite more creativity, more emotional nuance, and more meaningful character dynamics. This single change strengthens almost every weak point in the original. It fixes pacing by giving the story a central character who needs genuine challenges rather than instant victories. It improves tension because the audience would not be able to predict every outcome from the start. It enhances drama because her relationships would have to be written with actual care instead of being handed to Kirito without effort. It even supports better world building because the writers could no longer rely on the invincibility of the protagonist as an easy solution to every threat. In short, a female Kirito forces Sword Art Online to rise above awfulness. It pushes the show to stop coasting on cliches and finally become something distinctive, engaging, and worth remembering. As you can see, Kirito being a girl would already make Sword Art Online more interesting than what we got. A girl lead could add real struggle, better growth, and more feeling instead of the same flat power fantasy we watched before. The original Kirito has no edge, no real flaws, and no reason to care, while a girl version could actually face limits and push past them in a way that feels earned. It would force the story to try harder and stop leaning on cheap wins and bland hero moments. Honestly, just that one change would already put Sword Art Online on a better path than the weak and boring version we ended up with. The author does not have the guts to make Kirito a girl because Kirito is clearly meant to be a self-insert power trip. He is written as a wish story where everything bends to make him look cool, strong, and right all the time. Making Kirito a girl would break that fantasy and force real effort and thought, which the story avoids. Instead of taking risks or telling something new, the author plays it safe and hides behind the same bland hero setup. That is why Kirito stays the way he is and why the story feels so hollow. With a better writer and a female main character, Sword Art Online could have actually been good. The idea had promise and the setting could have led to real tension and growth. Instead, this awful writer wasted it all on lazy wish stuff and a boring hero who never earns anything. What could have been a strong story turned into one of the biggest letdowns ever. Not because the concept was bad, but because the writing was weak and scared to try anything real. I'm sure a lot of Sword Art Online fans will get mad and call me woke because I turned their hero into a girl. But I really do not care. If changing the lead breaks their love for the story, that just proves how weak it was to begin with. Let them be angry and loud about it. Getting upset over a made-up hero says more about them than it does about me or the idea. Sword Art Online fans should be mad at how bad the show turned out, not at someone trying to make it better. The story failed because of weak writing and lazy choices, not because people want to change things or fix what went wrong. Getting angry at ideas for improvement just avoids the real problem. If fans really cared about the series, they would want it to be better instead of defending a mess. The fact that Sword Art Online fans think this show is the greatest of all time is honestly laughable. There are so many better stories out there with real effort and care put into them. Calling Sword Art Online the best just shows how low the bar is when people confuse hype with quality. Sword Art Online fans really need to grow up and develop better taste. It is baffling that anyone could worship this mess as if it is some kind of masterpiece. The story is full of cliches, the characters are shallow, and the writing is lazy at best. There is so much better content out there, stories with real stakes, real emotion, and real creativity. Greek mythology, epic literature, and even well-crafted modern films all offer far more depth and meaning than Sword Art Online ever will. Continuing to praise this anime only shows a lack of discernment and an unwillingness to seek out stories that actually matter. Fans should be challenging themselves and their tastes instead of idolizing something so forgettable. But what do you think? Do you believe Kirito being a girl would actually be better for the story? I want to hear your thoughts, so share your opinions in the comments below. If you enjoyed this rant and want more hate videos like this, make sure to subscribe and stick around.